Canada's global brand is built on maple syrup warmth and a social safety net swagger. Free health care, low gun crime, winters so fierce they forge a national myth of looking out for your neighbor. Yet on any given night, the population of a mid-sized city is trying to survive without that neighborly roof. People curl up under bridge overhangs in Vancouver rain, claim a plastic-lined snowbank in Montreal, or squeeze into Toronto church basements as the mercury plummets. Meanwhile, Ottawa's housing budget has ballooned into the billions. Headlines trumpet boldest reforms in decades, and politicians swap podium sound bites about 4 million new homes. Something clearly isn't adding up. How did a nation that prides itself on compassion slide into a housing emergency that worsens every winter? And can it reverse course before another cold snap turns sidewalks lethal? Stick around. The numbers, the blame game, and the tiny prairie city that quietly cracked the code may upend everything you thought you knew about the true north. National shelter data show roughly 105,000 people cycled through emergency beds in 2022, but point-in-time counts suggest 30 to 35,000 Canadians are homeless on any given night, and an estimated 235 to 335,000 experience homelessness at some point each year. Capacity is expanding. Permanent shelter beds jumped from 18,336 to 20,676 between 2022 and 2023, a 13% surge. But demand is sprinting faster, leaving average occupancy near 80% even as new costs appear. One ominous trend stands out. Older adults are flooding shelters at the fastest rate. Seniors 65 plus still comprise under 4% of total users, yet they're the only age band whose shelter nights have risen every single year for a decade. A warning light for a country whose population is rapidly aging. If immigration-fueled growth, stagnant wages, and rental bidding wars continue on their current trajectory, federal analysts quietly project nightly homelessness could top 70,000 by 2030, crowding out both emergency budgets and public patience. Long story short, the wave has not crested. It's still building, and it's dragging unexpected age groups into its undertow. Next, we zoom in on who's being drawn under first. The crisis lands hardest where old inequities already run deep. Indigenous peoples account for just 4% of Canada's population, yet between 28 and 34% of shelter residents. And in urban centers, they are 8 times more likely to experience homelessness than non-Indigenous neighbors. Youth tell a parallel story. Those aged 13 to 24 make up about 19% of the homeless population. But LGBTQ2S and racialized teens appear in shelters at double their share of the general youth census. Hidden within those stats are runaway kids escaping family rejection, students couch surfing to finish high school, and first-year college hopefuls quietly camping in cars because residents' wait lists outlast their savings. Women represent roughly 27% of the national homeless count, yet studies show they endure disproportionate violence. So many avoid shelters altogether, trading visibility for unsafe relationships or dangerous gig work to keep a roof overhead. Finally, the largest and most visible group remains single men aged 25 to 55, a demographic swollen by layoffs, untreated mental health issues, and the collapse of blue-collar rental stock in resource towns. The common denominator? Every subgroup is booming for its own reasons, meaning one-size-fits-all policy fixes collapse under the weight of real-world complexity. And the biggest accelerant behind all those demographics is the cost of simply staying alive in modern Canada. Picture this. The median advertised rent for a one-bedroom in Toronto is flirting with $2,640, while Vancouver routinely cracks $2,800. Vacancy rates hover below 1% in both cities. Meanwhile, inflation has chewed through wage gains so ruthlessly that the average renter household now spends more than 30% of gross income on housing, crossing the benchmark that economists call core housing need. Federal response? A 2024 pledge to build 4 million new homes and overhaul mortgage rules by allowing 30-year insured amortizations on new builds for first-time buyers. Policies billed as the boldest reforms in decades. Critics counter that construction labor shortages, high interest rates, and zoning bottlenecks could stall the bulldozers long after ribbon-cutting photos fade. Adding pressure, international investors continue to treat empty condos like blue-chip stocks. Confident price curves will outpace any vacancy taxes Ottawa can devise. Until supply meaningfully outstrips demand or incomes rise to meet reality, middle-class Canadians will keep tumbling into overdrafts, and too many will cross that invisible line from precariously housed to no roof at all. Spiking rents intertwine with another, darker driver of street survival: the public health spiral gripping virtually every province. Roughly one-third of unhoused Canadians live with severe, often untreated mental illness, and the ongoing opioid crisis has killed more than 44,000 people since 2016, with 5,600 apparent opioid toxicity deaths recorded in just the first 9 months of 2024. Encampments have morphed into makeshift detox wards where naloxone kits are as common as winter blankets. British Columbia attempted a hardline encampment removal law in 2023, allowing authorities to clear tents from parks within 24 hours, but shelved large chunks of the plan after civil rights lawsuits and municipal pushback left implementation in limbo. The result across Canada is legal confusion. Cities debate whether to approach tent sites with social worker outreach or bylaw tickets, while paramedics respond to overdose calls that spike every payday. Harm reduction advocates push for safe supply pilots. Opponents fear normalizing drug use. Caught in the crossfire are thousands of people whose psychiatric care evaporated when institutional beds closed decades ago, only to find community support too fragmented or underfunded to catch them. As shelters hit capacity, Canada's biggest city offers a preview of what happens when migration dynamics collide with a housing crunch. Toronto runs the largest municipal shelter system in the country, but 2024 budget documents forecast 4,300 beds earmarked for refugee and asylum seekers alone, pushing projected costs to $250 million. And that's after Ottawa wired an emergency $240 million reimbursement for 2023. Even with that injection, city staff report roughly 40 newcomers turned away nightly when no cots remain, leaving families on sidewalk queues outside intake offices at 2 a.m. Meanwhile, Calgary, Halifax, and Montreal all saw record shelter overflow this past winter, fueled by a post-pandemic immigration boom that outpaced federal reception infrastructure. Policymakers walk a political tightrope, welcoming record newcomers to fill labor shortages while scrambling to house those who arrive before affordable rentals materialize. Local taxpayers, already bracing for property tax hikes, question why temporary hotel contracts keep ballooning with no exit plan in sight. Until federal, provincial, and municipal governments align on permanent housing pathways for arrivals, the nightly triage will continue, stretching emergency dollars ever thinner. Which begs the question, if billions are flowing, why aren't outcomes improving faster? Under Ottawa's Reaching Home strategy, $5 billion will flow to communities over 9 years, and the Rapid Housing Initiative alone is tasked with delivering 15,500 new units by 2026, a pace lauded as historic. Yet watchdogs note that average per-unit costs routinely top $400,000. Municipal permitting drags projects past election cycles, and public dashboards often measure dollars allocated rather than people actually housed. The 2024 budget also unveiled a $6 billion Canada Housing Infrastructure Fund for sewers, water lines, and transit links required to support density. But provinces must sign Build More Homes agreements before accessing most of the cash, a carrot some premiers call a velvet-covered hammer. Accountability advocates are now pushing for a national homelessness auditor with power to trace every grant from Treasury Board to individual outcomes, arguing that without hard metrics, the same billions could vanish into well-meaning but ineffective programs. In short, Canada's checkbook is open. The receipt, critics say, is illegible. So, can anyone point to a Canadian city that actually cracked the code? Yes, and its name rarely grabs headlines. Tiny Medicine Hat? Alberta declared it had functionally ended chronic homelessness in 2021, meaning no one stays without housing longer than 10 days once they've been identified. Their secret wasn't miracle money, it was relentless housing-first discipline. Put people in market apartments first, then wrap mental health, job training, and addiction supports around them. Inspired, cities from Waterloo to St. John are piloting modular, tiny home villages that assemble in weeks, while CMHC's new Pre-Approved Plans program aims to slash prefab approval times in half. Nationally, Budget 2024 brands itself the boldest housing plan in 50 years, dangling density bonuses for municipalities that upzone single-family lots, and threatening to redirect infrastructure money from provinces that stall reforms. Skeptics warn that NIMBY lawsuits can still freeze shovel-ready projects, but early wins, like Calgary's 2024 bylaw overhaul allowing fourplexes on any residential lot, hint that public opinion may finally be shifting toward "yes, in my backyard." Whether that momentum can scale across a country larger than the European Union remains the defining test of this decade. Which brings us to an uncomfortable final question. Canada sells itself as a land of opportunity where no one gets left in the cold. Yet tonight, as you're watching this, thousands of neighbors, from retired factory workers in Windsor to international students in Halifax, will unroll sleeping bags in stairwells, cars, or tent encampments because housing simply isn't there. We have the money, the compassion, and even the proof of concept in places like Medicine Hat. What we don't have is time. Every month of delay means more seniors pricing out, more youth aging into street life, and more overdose deaths that policy papers can't resurrect. So here's my challenge to you. If you controlled just $1 of Canada's housing budget, where would you spend it first, and why? Drop your answer below. Let's crowdsource the solution our leaders keep promising, but never quite deliver. Because if the world's 9th richest economy can't guarantee a roof for its own people, what hope does anyone else have?